want to take a moment to talk about how the overall feeling with Xbox has kind of flipped since that showcase, specifically since the 30 or 40 minutes where they just talked about Starfield. And in fact, the hype level for this game seemingly has spiked heavily online. I mean, there was already excitement around the game since Bethesda and the top talent there was going to be creating a big single-player experience. Fallout 76, not great for Bethesda in general with their image, but that was them trying to wade into the world of multiplayer. This is like Bethesda's top studio, their top talent, working on what they do best with the single-player narrative-driven open-world create-your-own-adventure experience. And I will admit, after that showcase, I'm pretty impressed, and I wanted to go over some of that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel. So after the 40-minute presentation, I was genuinely impressed with what they showed, mostly because it just seems almost overwhelming the amount of stuff that they talked about there. They, of course, went over how vast the world, specifically the universe, is with the 1,000 planets or what have you, but people have talked about it being procedurally generated. And while that is correct in the sense that the landscape on the planets, according to Todd Howard, are procedurally generated, that, of course, to save time when it's more about placing rocks or cliffs or grass, that sort of thing. But what they have really worked to do is handcraft those planets when it comes to a narrative experience. And I think that is like the biggest thing that's going to separate it from a No Man's Sky, as that's what a lot of people are drawing comparisons to. Todd Howard was quick to point out that he thinks it's a better comparison to Red Dead Redemption 2. And in that sense, where you have the narrative-driven experience, but a world that feels very, very alive, it sounds like some very lofty ambitions here. And the biggest thing to me, though, is we talk about the open world game, and I almost wonder if Starfield could potentially release and introduce like the next step. Not necessarily open world, but open universe, I guess. I know technically you go to these planets, and while they showed it in kind of a menu system, you're sort of, you can still fly around, but when you go to a planet, you pick a landing spot that they have predetermined from what I've seen, and then you essentially teleport there, kind of, right? You're not flying to it like you do with No Man's Sky, but according to them, all of this and kind of that predictability as to where you're going to land and stuff has played into the idea of each planet having its own narrative and kind of its own experience. And based on some hands-on impressions that we've even heard now from IGN, they played it for, they said like an hour or two, and they didn't really do much of anything when it came to the main quest. So based on the amount of planets, the amount of storylines that could break away, seems like that's going to happen to a lot of people. You get into this game and you don't even really touch the main quest. You end up making your own quest and just kind of going off into different parts of the universe. And I know a lot of the discussion has been around the frame rate and it being 30 frames per second on the Xbox. And if you want 60 frames, you'll probably have to build a decent enough PC. And based on the system requirements, I feel like this game is specifically being tied down by CPU limitations on the Xbox Series systems, as opposed to turn the resolution down and you'll get 60 or 120 frames or something like that. And a lot of it has to do with things happening around the game itself. I mean, we see all the like all the sandwiches you can get, right? That was a big thing. But the physics, the ability to have all these different items in space across the universe, I kind of think just the overall logic with the game and it working and them having limitations as to what they can do with each frame made them go, instead of an experience on the Xbox that we can uncap the frame rate, but who knows what you're going to get where you are, we just lock it to 30. While I wouldn't mind them just unlocking the frame rate, and if you want to have that kind of experience, you can, especially since the Xbox Series does at least have VRR, which would help to smooth out the experience. From what we've seen in the past, I feel like Bethesda's games, especially with like Creation Engine, has had the game itself tied to the frame rate, and when you tried to push it up too high, all kinds of weird stuff would happen in the game, and I almost wonder that if they were coming across different bugs and issues there. The PC version of this game is going to be very, very interesting when it comes out, because you know the community is going to try to do all kinds of stuff to it, and we'll see what happens when the frame rate maybe even gets above 60, 120, 144, all of that, if the game stands up to that. Now, we did see this game have a pretty good effect on the Xbox in terms of sales, but even on Steam, Starfield exploded up the top sellers rank up to like the top spot, sitting next to things like Counter-Strike, which, while that's free, you still buy stuff in the game and all of this. But basically, for paid games for a day or two there, it was at the top spot on Steam, which is pretty impressive considering you can just get it on Game Pass. And I also noticed on like the Amazon sales charts, while Starfield isn't necessarily in like the top 50, I have seen the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate cards kind of climb up a bit, which makes me wonder if people are just subscribing to Game Pass, which is the big thing that Microsoft is attempting to do. Introduce these titles that are very compelling and will take you a long time, so you'll stay subscribed and get more and more people into the Game Pass ecosystem. I mean, when you really break down the Starfield showcase, the amount of things you can do, whether it's base building, building out your ship, joining different factions, taking part in all these different quests and storylines across hundreds or 1,000 planets or whatnot, it's going to be a while. I mean, people still play Skyrim to this day, and Starfield looks like it's on a whole other level. And in fact, based on once again, what Todd Howard has says, and I do want to point out, he is, of course, trying to sell people on this game. He's mentioned that there is more handcrafted content here than any game that they've ever done, and in terms of dialogue, more than Skyrim or Fallout 4 combined. And I think visually the game looks really good, since Bethesda does like to mostly focus on world building and the narrative aspect to it. And the combat looks a lot better than what they've done previously with something like Fallout even. So I'm very excited for Starfield, and it does kind of feel like now Microsoft has gained quite a bit of momentum and things have flipped heavily for them after that showcase. And then they've also worked to set up 2024 post Starfield's release. So I mentioned I thought 2024 is when things would really start to get moving for Xbox, and right now it's kind of looking that way. And I'm also wondering, what's up with the force powers at the end of the Starfield presentation? I know everyone else saw that too. Is that just part of the story? Will we have force push and we do all kinds of other things in the game that kind of have this supernatural feeling to it? But let me know what you guys think about all this here today, especially with Starfield, if that showcase really sold you, and if you're someone who maybe even picked up the $300 collector's edition. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.